cautious about this idea of some kind of separateness to a creative sector. And indeed, I think that separateness is very unhelpful. And that's why, for example, the RIBA is very clear that we're not about architecture as an abstract idea. What we're about is about championing better buildings, championing stronger communities and a greener environment. And we do that through architecture, through our members, but architecture as an abstract concept is not that useful in the real world. 4 things then to answer the question about what's I believe is necessary to enable UK's creative sector to be world class. Number 1, and you won't be surprised to hear me say this, is business nous, so that we understand that, say, in the world of architecture, that applies in design and elsewhere, we're not purely about aesthetics, and we have to be able to be very clear about fighting against that idea about aesthetics. So I would say that the skill of creative people is about understanding real user needs and then applying creativity to meet those needs. So we should be absolutely unashamed about the ways in which the world that we're all in and other worlds actually add real value, both economic and social. Number 2, responding to real world problems. So again, speaking for architecture, I think it applies elsewhere. Architects are absolutely centrally placed to meet the current crises of our world, delivering massive value out of shrinking resources, both financial in the current economic climate, but also environmental. Getting that's the second one. Third, the thing that's needed is competition. Keeps us on our toes, keeps creativity working, and I would encourage that to be competition of all sorts, and we should not be ashamed or defensive rather about competition. That leads us to my 4th point, which is about free flow of people. Any ideas that it is a good idea that we should be defensive about the way people move across the world is unhelpful to creativity. I think we should be arguing for an absolutely free flow of people, ideas, and their creative outputs across the world, and that enriches London, it enriches the rest of the world if smart people from here go elsewhere and infect the rest of the world with some of the creativity that is represented in London.
Now, I wonder if I could ask the panellists to respond to, in a sense, what Caroline Thompson was saying, which is that actually the free flow of people and ideas and indeed business obviously comes into contact with an existing situation where you have a very substantial cultural institution with very substantial assets which happen to be in a particular place. Now, how can one, as it were, deal with the disbanded fortress, create clusters of the sorts that are being talked about, inspire creativity, and kind of get some cheap and dirty back rooms of the sort that, I mean, in a good sense, you find in Soho at dirt cheap rent. So the start-ups and the 2-person companies don't feel crushed by the weight of Starbucks and the forces of international capitalism. Any thoughts from a practical point of view how one goes about this? I mean, Hamish, your members work in everything from those back rooms to their owned office blocks. Any advantages to something being planned from the outside, or in the end is it all going to be people doing their own thing?
Well, I think the point that was made there is that the price of square footage is absolutely fundamental to this. I think the reason that fine artists, sculptors and so on, end up in the wilderness is because it's big space, cheap. And they go there first, they make it trendy and sexy, and then the restaurants, bars and everything else, and then the residential people follow thereafter. We've seen that over and over again. That's why Shoreditch and King's Cross have become the centres, because they were very, very cheap. So I think that the most fundamental thing with this development here, if it's to happen, is to somehow or other make sure there's enough cheap space to lure these creative businesses in here. There are some of our members who are paying £80 a foot in central London because they bought in at the wrong time. That is not a sustainable rent. I think we should be looking at 10 quid a foot is what we really need, I think.
Harry.
I wouldn't like Caroline's job. I wouldn't like to be trying to turn this into a creative area, because I would agree with some of the ideas that Benio was putting forward about the need for a degree of anarchy. I think if you come to an event like this and there's a session on the time on the schedule for networking, it always feels incredibly forced. It's a bit like that with trying to turn an area into a creative sector, because actually that the very act of forcing it can stifle it.
Tim?
Yeah, I may not answer the question directly, but I think the one comment that I would make about big structures aimed at bringing creative communities together in some way is it can be a very good thing, and it can also run the risk of being very self-referential, very introspective. The biosphere gets created and everybody looks around one another and goes, God, it's great to be great. Look at us all here together in this fabulous place. And surely we need no intellectual sustenance from anywhere outside of these four walls or berms or wherever you might be. And I spent some time of my life living in the US in big companies that campused up and got like that. And the biggest daily challenge of our lives was to get people to understand that the answer is outside of the campus. It's not there. So for any of these things to succeed, in my mind, it's got to be probably 50% about who's there and what they're doing. And it's also about the sense that that the place represents a window into another set of worlds that is not readily accessible by other means. It can't just be another place where people go and hang out. I think there's got to be some real different vision attached to any venture of this sort.
When Olympia and York were originally developing Canary Wharf, they appointed an agency called Ogilvy to help them do that, market the site. And Ogilvy came up with the idea of moving Adland to Canary Wharf. And that seemed like a good idea because the print business, the newspaper business, had already kind of gone there. So to your point earlier, recreate Fleet Street in Canary Wharf was the concept. And Ogilvy and everybody else were very heavily incentivized to do that. And a guy called Mike Walsh, who was then in charge of Ogilvy, got all the top agencies together and said, let's all move to Canary Wharf en bloc and put Adland over there. And they came to the summit meeting, and Ogilvy was committed to go because it was their client, and everybody else chickened out. And they stayed in central London in W1. That is why Ogilvy is in Cabot Square today. And they've had a really, really tough time sustaining their business in that area of London. And if they could, they would move back into central London tomorrow. So exactly to your point, creating that campus and getting everybody to go is a really, really hard thing. And I think my observation, for what it's worth, would be you need an agency, a really hot agency or design company or architecture firm to want to go to this place and become really successful there. That becomes the magnet. 20% of the employees of IPA member agencies turn over every year. So of 18,000 employees, 20% move jobs every year. That's why they like being close to each other. That's why they get all this inspiration from each other. So it's an organic kind of a thing I think you need to create.
Yet, curiously enough, it's often the small people that establish new areas like Hoxton rather than the big ones. I know that may be at the art end of the spectrum rather than more at the business end. Moira?
I think you need to welcome those small micro enterprises in really early, artists or commercial, but then not suck the blood out of them, drain them all of everything that they bring to an area and then price them out of the market. So somehow you have to believe that there's a benefit in cross-subsidy that keeps things affordable, not free, but affordable for those small industries because they're needed and they're needed long term. I think otherwise you do sanitize areas very quickly as you lose that more radical anarchic spirit. I think there's a cultural thing for the BBC about genuinely welcoming others in and believing that they don't have all the solutions in-house or actually all the creativity or artistic talent in-house either. If you create the space for artists to want to come here because they can see a benefit, they're not stupid, their business is in their own right, and they can see that they're going to pick up business, there may be the start of growth there. And I think genuinely the sense of connecting local people and creating demand through that route as well is absolutely essential if this idea is to fly.
Thank you. Harry, any further thoughts on that? Anything from the audience? Any observations or questions you might like to put to the panel? Yes, there's several. One at the back. Let's kick off there.
My name's Anna Harding from Space. I'm from the hinterlands of East London, where the artists operate under the radar and off your map. But Hackney and Tower Hamlets Bow are actually incredibly, if we did our map, you'd see that there's a hell of a lot of creativity